This is Dan Bolen, and I'm your host for our podcast, The Courage to Be Courageous. We want to encourage all of our listeners to come and hear stories of people who have embraced fear in their life and they've used courage to get through it. I think you'll find our stories incredible, and we have a great person today that we're going to be interviewing. His name is Richard Christopher Scuderi. And how I met Richard is on Facebook, and I believe at the time he was doing a tour for Barnes & Noble. He's written two incredible books. The first one is called The Lonely Boy, and the second one is The Enlightened Man. But he has a fascinating story and why he came up with writing these two books, which are really memoirs of his life. So, Richard, thank you so much for joining our podcast today, and it's such a pleasure having you. And I'll let you tell us a little bit about your history and how you were able to come out and when you came out and what it was like for you in that time in your life.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Have you also written a book with a similar topic? I think we already, not knowing each other personally yet, have a lot in common. So
it totally did, yes.
Cathartic to me to come across somebody who had some of the family dynamics that I also had, because I found that I didn't have that in common with anybody else. They'd feel bad for some of the things that happened to me with my family, but they couldn't identify. You were one of the first people, when I read your book, I understood, I assimilated, I can understand the frustration when you have people that should be by your side, and for whatever reason, they're not. So my journey sort of began, believe it or not, many, many years ago, when I was about 8 years old. I was an altar boy in a Catholic church in New Brunswick. And I'm very spiritual to this day. I'm a very spiritual person. And when I was on the altar at the sacristy getting the host out, a voice said to me, "Do you remember our covenants?" And I instinctually said yes, although I don't know what that meant. And my life from 0 to 8 was charmed. I had a wonderful mother and father, a great situation, a brand new home to live in, private school, and a nice life. But from 8 years old on, it started to change. I was becoming groomed by the predator priest that asked me to do all his masses. And that was the beginning of a life that was full of a lot of angst and problems, especially in connection with my sexuality and being growing up and then identifying that I was gay and coming out, and some of the struggles that I went through. And so much has happened, fast forward as the years went, that I kind of went back to those days and I put all the pieces together when I was journaling. And somehow it turned into a book. I wasn't even looking to write a book. My therapist had suggested for me to journal to sort of heal myself. And somehow 4 years down the road, it turned into a book. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I'd like to, and it's an incredible book. I've read the first one. I have the second one. I'm going to be starting that in the next week. The Lonely Boy, the first book, is phenomenal. I want to make a comment, though, about this Catholic priest, because he groomed you at a young age. And you talked about the abuse, the molestation, and how that caused you not to trust people in your life.
And that is a problem, because as far as intimacy was concerned, I wasn't even ever with anyone until I was 21 in a serious committed relationship. I had fear of being attacked because in the first time at 13, he brought men in that held me down. So you lose your faith. You lose your faith in humanity when something like that happens. And to this day, it's very hard for me to trust anyone because of that. You lose faith in humanity. But I felt that I wanted to come forward, that bad things can happen to you, but you have to take a leap and you have to live life. And that's why I kind of went public with what had happened to me. And in regards to the sexual molestation by this predator priest, who later on in life really ended up in a mental health hospital until his death because he was escaping prosecution. It turned out in a way to be a blessing for me, in the fact that I was able to, late in my life, after I wrote this book, I was contacted by the State House in Trenton. They wanted me to testify. There's a bill to get mental health dollars for mental health for people who've been victims of sexual molestation. And I testified at the State House and had a voice that was on that evening's news. And it really empowered me that even though something like this could happen to you, it doesn't own you. You can do something triumphant with it.
That's
and when
a
that
powerful
bill
comment.
passed, I felt very much a part of paying something forward. How many people that day were suffering?
And I think it shows the courage you had, Richard, to be able to take control of your life and have a voice. And that voice was you being open and honest to what happened to you, and you weren't quiet anymore. And I think that took a lot of courage on your part.
Right.
Courage. So let me tell you, so let's talk to you about your family a little bit, because I know you have two sisters.
Sure.
Two sisters.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a mother and father, and you came out to your father first, or your mother?
No, what had happened was, and this is so unfortunate, besides the sexual abuse, father suggested, all of a sudden we were doing this for 6 months, and I think he got spooked that he was going to get caught. So he said to me on Holy Saturday, "You're healed." And he told my father that my mother that I was healed, and that when I got upset, he said, "Get a journal and write your feelings in the journal and put it in a locked drawer. That's your way to move forward." So I did exactly that, being a good Catholic boy, and I wrote in that journal. Well, my mother there was no barriers, there was no kids' rights back then. She got that drawer open, and I talked about my feelings. I hadn't acted on it, but I talked about my feelings, and she confronted me with that. And unfortunately, because of the strict Catholic upbringing and the time that she entered the world, where it was not only a sin, it was a crime, it didn't work well between us. And we had an estrangement up until her death. Unfortunately, she had a very early death while I was still in college, unexpected and very quick. So it was only, I was 21 at the time, and in my first relationship, it was only at the very, very end that I started to make a little peace with her, and then it was gone. So I often, when I speak, and I do speak around the country to people about their relationship with their parent, of my situation, because we all think that, our life is ours. It's not really ours. If God calls us, you go.
That's correct. Yeah.
We make plans and God laughs. So I want to let people know this, right? But I want to teach people the thought that they might not always be there, whether it's the child or the parent, and to be conscious of that.
Yes.
And because I know that we would have gotten to a better place during the period of my time, 1986, 87, that I was coming out. AIDS was rampant and frightening, and we didn't know what it was. And it scared her, and as well it should. I know she sort of tried to give me tough love, not because she didn't love me, but because she did. And it was a very frightening time. And I don't have anger towards her, but I lost all that time. Someone that I really loved, because of the perception of homosexuality is bad and a sin. And what a waste, what a waste.
And I think you said she died at 47, Richard?
47, yeah.
47.
Unexpected, very quickly, and within 3 weeks. So
wow,
it was tough. It was very, very tough. At the same time, I had my first relationship when I was 21 for a year. We lived together. I was very happy. But when my mother got sick, he started to back off. And when she died, he left me. So I had two things happen to me at the same time, and it was overwhelming. because that back then you didn't talk about 1987 of having a boyfriend and the whole thing. So I just kept everything on the inside, which led me to develop ulcerative colitis and lose 30 pounds and go through a lot of physical problems because I kept all of that
in.
All of that. And I say in the book, I really believe that tumors are just concentrated sadness. Now, I know that's a simplification of a medical issue, but there is something to that between disease and dis-ease in your life.
I agree with that, yeah.
It wasn't until I was about 25, 26 that I began to sort of slowly come back into my life again.
And your father at that time was supportive of you, wasn't he, Richard?
He was from the very beginning. He had overheard a conversation between Brian and I, and he said, "It's okay, who you are, but this guy doesn't love you." He was so right. He could hear in his voice something that was not good, and that in fact was the case. And to his death, he really always supported me. When I met my husband, who will be celebrating in 2 weeks 30 years together, he reached out to him. Thank you. They developed a rapport, sometimes even independent of me, and it was a positive thing. But just the father, not anybody else. My two sisters really have no relationship with me. When I came out to my sister, first of all, I'm sort of middle of the road. I'm not femme by any means, and I'm not a bodybuilder, but I'm sort of somewhere in the middle. So I never, even in school, gay never really, it didn't come across that way. So that wasn't so much an issue for me, except for something that happened. But so when I told her, she was shocked. She thought I was kidding. She said, "Oh, you're kidding." And I said, "No, I'm not." And she was very, very unhappy with it. She told me she didn't expect me. And something came out about equal rights for gay people back in the late 80s. And she voted against it and told me she did. It was not a good situation.
How about your other sister?
They're not in my life for decades.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very, very disappointing. I went through a lot of psychological problems with anxiety and depression and addiction to clonazepam and a lot of heartache over those losses. I'm very much an empath. When I was in college, I had a teacher, Professor Dr. Vienendahl, and they were talking about empathy, and they said, Richard Scuderi is an empath. And he saw that in me. And because I'm an empath, as I do believe you are as well, Dan, family and friendship is just everything. It's okay that we're successful and we did the other stuff, but to our core, it's the friends and the family that sustain us, and that's very important. And to not have that was very heartbreaking.
And I want to
I'm not alone.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. It just made me think of a comment.
No, I'm not alone in that.
Yeah.
I'm not alone in that. Not everybody gets the perfect family. Some parents are jealous of their children. Now, I didn't have that as my dynamic, but in talking to people around the country, all people have a different dynamic. It's not always right. It's not always the way you think it would.
Mm-hmm. And I think because I love deeply. I've always loved deeply. And so when I lose a love of my life, I grieve deeply. Grieve deeply. And sometimes with me, that can bring on depression for me.
Of course.
But I've always accepted that. I love people. I love my family, of course, which many who have read my book know that I have nothing. They don't have anything to do with me because of the religious background. And I'm grieving that, and I'm grieving it deeply because I love them deeply. And I just wanted to tailgate on what you said because that's so true of us. I think you and I are very similar that way, Richard. So
very much so.
And then I'm going to talk about your physical ailments, and you're kind of fortunate to be alive. Would that be? God has a message for you. It's not your time yet. So I'd like our audience to know about some of the physical things you went through, which are really powerful. I mean, amazing to me that you were able to survive what you did. Tell us a little bit about
Well,
those.
I had pretty good physical health up until my mom passed and Brian left my life. And then my first sort of crisis was I developed severe ulcerative colitis, and I wasn't getting enough nutrition. I was losing my hair. I had dropped 30 pounds overnight, and I was taking all sorts of steroids and drugs, medical drugs, just to sort of be solvent in that. And then I went into remission. I got that under control, and I was single for about 6 years between Brian and John. And towards the end of being single, I think my light was on. I was ready to move on to someone else and something else. And I wasn't feeling well, and I found out that I had a large thyroid tumor. And when I went to Sloan Kettering in New York, they told me that, in fact, they thought it was malignant. So in the beginning of my relationship with my husband, John, I had to tell him, well, I may have thyroid cancer. And he kind of stuck in there, which is what I think led me to believe, well, even though you don't trust people, I can trust this person. In fact, he was the one that drove me to the hospital. And back in the early 90s, there were no rights for gay people. They could have said, I'm sorry, you're not a family member. Maybe because we were in New York City, it was a little bit different. But if I was in another city, I don't think that would have been possible for him to be with me during that. So I lost a good portion of my thyroid, but it was benign. I have some deficits because of it with medications and so on. And then I had a run of a period of time that I was healthy. I suffered from depression and anxiety throughout that because I wanted a relationship with my family, my nephews, my niece, and that wasn't going to happen, so I struggled with that. But when I was 45, I started having terrible headaches, and I went to the doctor, and basically this doctor said to me, you have a massive brain tumor and you're going blind quickly. So I did, in fact, go blind. I did lose my eyesight completely. I woke up on a Monday morning. I said, John, I can't see. And I was rushed to New York Presbyterian Hospital, and they have some cutting-edge procedures for brain tumors like mine. And for 2 days, until they could take me, I laid on a gurney in a hallway, blind. So that sort of just, changes you. It changes you as a person, your perspective, what a gift sight is. I didn't think about it. I don't think most of us think about what a gift sight is. It's like looking at a beautiful painting. Sight is everything.
Of course.
Right. And then when I did get through the surgery, I eventually got my eyesight back about 6 weeks after my dad had a massive hemorrhagic stroke. And then I was working on trying to help him. And during the process of helping him with his 10-year battle until he passed 2 years ago, I developed the chronic version of my mother's blood cancer. It's called PV. It's a rare blood cancer, but it is treatable with phlebotomy. So for about a year and a half, every other week, I went for a 3-hour where they sort of bled me until I was in anemia. So I'm a pretty hardy-looking guy.
Oh,
if you look at me,
word.
you wouldn't know that. But I have really been through the ringer in my life when it comes to things.
Wow. Well, you had so many tragedies, and yet you were able to get through those. And, I think when you have tragedies, and you and I talked about this yesterday, and I haven't gone into detail about my tragedies. I had a brain bleed in which they went in and didn't think I was going to make it, and I survived it.
Amazing.
But when you go through these things, you stop and think about life, and every little piece of life is important to you because you realize.
Well, exactly.
Because I realize that you may not be here tomorrow. You may not be here today. So when you face a life-threatening situation, it really helps you to understand life is precious and live as your authentic self.
Exactly.
I want to make a comment because you made a comment too, because I held my the fact I was gay didn't come out until I was 70 in for so long. I do believe I suffered physically for it. I have severe heart issues.
Must be.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'm still fighting issues with my heart because if it's you're holding it in so long and it's going to come out physically one way or the other. And I think that's
Yeah,
why it's important that our audience understand when you have fear and you're hiding your authentic self, it will take a toll on you physically and emotionally and mentally. So really,
absolutely.
I think I think both Richard and I have gone through similar issues on that as well too. So let's talk a little bit more then about your book and talk about your life. Oh, there's one other thing we want to talk about. Also, I think that the reason that Richard is with us today is because God has not finished with him yet.
I hope so.
He's not.
I always say that
You had a couple of other
when I get it.
tragedies. Remember we talked about the one there in San Diego.
Oh, yes. So I've had a couple of, I guess I would call them near misses.
Okay.
And one of my near misses was that I was in the Hillcrest section of San Diego, I guess back in about 96 or so. And I was with a friend of mine, and he was single. I was already married. I'd been married most of my adult life. And he left me to go talk to somebody. I was standing there. This very nice man who was an architect from Minneapolis came over and was starting a conversation with me. We were having a very pleasant, nice conversation. When out of the corner of my eye, I see a Filipino guy with glasses charging me like a rhino. I could see this guy charging me. And he came over and he punched me very hard to attack me for speaking to this person who I didn't approach, who approached me. And a friend of mine grabbed me by my belt loop of my pants, pulled me. I actually was on the floor, pulled me out of the bar, and we were outside of the bar. And I said, "Why did you do that?" And he says, "That guy has crazy in his eye." And shortly after that, he committed the first murder, and he killed the man I was talking to soon after that.
Wow. And then he also killed Verace, didn't you
Right,
say? Yeah.
exactly. When they remade it recently, and I watched it, I had a panic attack because he physically assaulted me. He physically touched me. I felt his breath. I felt him hurting me, and the bruise I had on my arm from him attacking me. So it was, sort of I think things happen for a reason. I don't believe in coincidences. And it just led me to realize you're here for a purpose. It could be taken away from you, and learn from it. Learn from it. The second thing that happened, which was kind of crazy, was I was the last person in JFK Jr.'s plane before he was killed in that plane. During that week, I had some business with the airport, and the guy liked me, and he said, "You know what? I want to show you something. You're going to see the most beautiful plane Cessna you've ever seen before." So he took me into the plane, and I got in, and so on. And it was very distinct. It was very beautifully trimmed out. And just sort of, you could tell there was big money there, and it was very well done. And he said, "The man is very famous, very famous. I'm not at liberty to tell you who it was." A couple days later, it was a Friday night in the summer, and I'm looking on the news, and I'm like, "That's the Cessna that I was just in."
Mm-hmm.
And of course,
Wow.
it was, and he was killed.
Yeah, he and his
Once
wife.
again, I said, "Yeah, near tragedy, but escaped." And that I've had some experiences like that consistently through my life, and it made me realize what's the bigger picture. Why are we here? And I want my life to be purposeful. So those are some of the things that kind of grounded me about my own life.
So let's talk about our audience today because we have both our own stories, as everybody has a story. What would you like our audience to get from your story? What are the things our listeners, can there be some points that they need to walk away? I think you made some incredible comments yesterday when we talked about this, about being able to embrace your fear and get through it. But you talk about that life was not meant to be easy. So
No.
tell us about that.
Well, I learned through the bad things. I don't think you necessarily learn from happy times. I think we need that in order to sustain life and stay in life and be physically healthy, which is what we talked about. But I don't think life was meant to be completely joyous. I view life as a school. I understand and I realize now through the things that have happened to me that life is temporary. This is a temporary part of a journey. It's our school. So how do you learn from things? You learn from things when you have tragedies, when you have adversity, when you get people that are working against you, because it builds your character, your strength, your knowledge, and so on. So I think, and you see this, I think, today with the younger people that were so much more coddled than the previous generations. And they're not doing as well. They have a lot of anxiety and depression, and they have a hard time functioning. Whereas I think because the previous generations weren't so coddled, and we had it maybe a little bit tougher, it made you better. It made you stronger. When I look at my great aunts and uncles and grandparents, they were such good people. They were such hardworking people. There was so much an attraction there to those people because they had something to offer. And I'm not seeing that same warmth, the people skills in some of the younger people because they're not as exposed to it. It's all about technology.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see that it's very important to connect to others. It's very important to just be a part of a community.
Mm-hmm. And what about this life as a journey? And people are listening, and they have a journey. Is there any other tidbits you can give them that will help them to be able to have courage in whatever they're going through? I mean, we all have fear in our life. Fear is common for everyone,
right.
But so is courage.
Right.
So
the biggest, I would say that the biggest thing that we need to learn in life is, and which your book is all about, and your mantra, and what you're doing here, which I think is wonderful, by the way, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Is to push past the fear. Fear is just an illusion. You will always be here. Maybe not on Earth, but you will always exist. And when you come to the understanding that you'll always exist, there's a lot less fear involved in doing things. Fear is a lot in our head, and most of fear is not even logical. And it holds us back from creating our dream. I truly believe God wants us to exist here. He wants us to thrive here. He wants us to make change here. I think that's what it's all about when you're on Earth, is to move matter and to make change. You can't do that if you're fearful. Fear paralyzes you. And the hardest thing I have to do is now work through my fear. I do a lot of public speaking, and often people will come up to me afterwards and say, you spoke to 1,000 people today, or you were on video, or you were doing this. Aren't you scared? I said, I'd be more scared not to have a voice. You understand what I'm saying?
What a powerful point. Yeah, and for many years, many of our community has not had a voice.
Correct.
And now we have a voice, and now we need to use our voice, and that's the reason I do my podcast. I have a voice.
Sure.
I was quiet all those years. I have a voice now, and by getting together with people like you, Richard, we're having voices right now. We're doing something with what we have. That's a powerful thing. That's a powerful comment.
And you've experienced so much loss yourself, and hardship, and struggle. I think it makes you a better person. I heard an interview with Rosie O'Donnell, and if you know Rosie O'Donnell's story, she lost her mother, I believe, to breast cancer very early on, and it profoundly affected her. And she was talking about she feels the need to pay it forward, to do things for other people, to reach out to them. And she's known for doing that, to reach out to other people all the time. And she said the reason is she experienced the other end, the absolute loss, and that made her more compassionate to other people.
Wow, that's a great comment. Yeah, and I've always I always said that when we go through our biggest tragedies, we get a gift. We don't see the gift.
Sure.
We don't get to see the gift at the time, but it always comes. It always comes. And God lets us know when the gift comes. So yeah, and I think it's a good comment. I want to make another comment that when you were talking about fear, which ties in with my website, I always said fear, FEAR, is false evidence that appears real. That's what fear is.
There you go. That's profound because it's exactly what it is.
It appears real to you, even though it's false evidence. And I think one of the things, so when we have that fear, what happens? People do two things. They run from the fear, which the fear gets stronger. It's out doing push-ups when you run from it, okay? Or you need to walk through the fear. You need to walk through the fear, and that's what my podcast is about, by getting courage. Now, sometimes we have others that give us encouragement that gives us courage. Sometimes having a listening ear from someone gives us the courage. Sometimes hearing your story, Richard, gives us the courage. Or hearing my story gives people the courage. You will get courage. Even though you don't feel courageous, you will get courage. You get that by not running from the fear. It's fearful. I'm in it. I'm not going to run from it. And I'm going to get the courage to get through that. Such an important reason that we need community. We need people to talk to. We need people to associate with. And I want to encourage our listeners today, if you are going through something in your life, whether it's fear of anything, get a community around the fear. Get a community around it. And one of the things when I lost my whole family and friends, because I came out and acted out as being a gay person, I lost them all. But I went out, I took the initiative to go out and get a community. And I have a great community. And I just want to make that comment because I think, I always say when you're with yourself and there's nobody in your life and you don't have any type of friends, you're going to, way I call it, get caught in the squat. Okay, you get caught in the squat. And so when to encourage community and encourage volunteering for things, encouraging being able to help individuals. One of the podcasts I did that is out now is I went out and I did a tour of St. Jude's Research Hospital, and
which is my favorite charity, by the way.
Oh my God, it was powerful. I did a 30-minute segment now on my podcast. It brought me to my knees to see the courage these kids have and the courage these doctors have. And they don't run from the fear. They're in the fear. And they have a whole community of St. Jude's to help them get through the fear and show the courage they do. Anyway, I just had to add that in. So
no, it's great.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. So, is any other things that you want to say before we end the podcast? It's such a pleasure being able to have you on my podcast.
No, I think this is terrific, and I'm sure at some point I'm working on some things with the book and some things I'm doing that we will connect. Whether I go west, you go east, or we meet somewhere in the middle, or something. Because I want to continue on the book tour now with the new book, The Enlightened Man. But when I want to get across to people, and this is the thing, and I'm certainly not part of any really organized religion anymore because of my bad experience. But I do believe to some degree, if you can open your heart to having some faith, I think it does make your life a lot easier. Even though the organized religion that I was in let me down, that doesn't mean there isn't a God. That doesn't mean that there aren't things happening around you to help you. People on this earth to help you, but also people that have passed that love you to help you. And I strongly believe that when you can sort of open yourself up to that possibility, because we don't always see those things, you can have a more content life. Because I have a strong sense of faith, and I feel bad for people that don't have a sense of faith, that feel that you come in, you're here, and then you go. To me, that never made any sense. You know, it's part of to me, it's clearly part of a bigger experience. And when you have the knowledge that it's not just what we do when we're here, I think your behavior towards other people begins to change. And that's what I try to do when I talk to people, when I go on the road, when I talk to people, is that to open your heart to everybody, because life is bigger. We're in a microcosm when we're here on Earth. There's a lot more out there. And when you cross over, you'll probably have a better understanding or a recognition of maybe something that you've been a part of in the past. It's hard for people in the physical world letting to embrace that. But for me, it's just obvious by the things I've seen, by the circumstances, by the behavior of people. And that's what I'd like to see if I can help people to do, to open their heart maybe to a little bit of faith. And that doesn't mean the collection basket. That doesn't mean, reading the Torah every night. Whatever culture, whatever it is, we're all towards the same goal, which is that there's some sort of a source. And I believe the source is love. So if you live in anything else other than love, you're not religious. You're not part of it. So when you condemn somebody or not talk to somebody or eliminate somebody or not accept somebody or have hate speech, you are as far away from the source as possible.
Oh, and that's such a true comment. In fact, the scripture says God is love. God is love. He doesn't say he practices love. He is love. And I am on the same target with you, Richard, because I still have a good spiritual connection with my father and his son, and I believe that in the afterlife. My partner does not. He is atheist, and I accept that. I accept that. But I also understand that the spiritual part and connecting with love, it's the principles that Christ taught, the principles of love, compassion, kindness, mildness, self-control, all of those fruitage of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5 in the Bible. That's what we need to practice. And I want to ask you one comment before we go. You and John now are married. Are you happy with your life? And do you feel you're living your authentic self? And are you at peace with your life?
I would say that I am content, which is a good place to be. I don't think happy is a realistic long-term thing, because we go into periods where we're unhealthy. I just lost a dear friend of mine later in life. My dad sort of became my best friend. So we became friends with one of his couple friends, Carol and Don, and they became like second parents to me, especially after my father's stroke. And she just passed away, and last Saturday we had her memorial service. Mm-hmm. So even though I'm in a lovely home, I have a safe relationship, wonderful friends about me, I'm not happy right now because of grieving
of course.
Her loss, this beautiful lady. But in terms of contentment, very much so. The more, there were people that really came out against me when I told the truth. Dan, so help me God, I told the absolute truth. There was nothing I held back. Some of it was very harsh. Some of it made me look very harsh. But if I was going to do this, I wanted to tell the absolute truth with the thought that I want to bring change. I want people to forgive me. I want to forgive people. And I want to have an open communication of love and acceptance and so on. That didn't happen with a lot of people. A lot of people were very angry that I wrote this book. But I didn't do it for the wrong reason. As we both said, you don't necessarily get rich off a book. I didn't do it for that. I did it to put out there for the people that are suffering and thinking of committing suicide or have a drug or alcohol problem, that if you're hurting, there's another solution. You don't have to go to the dark side. And I want to be the voice of that, if not the face of that, if possible.
I like the idea of contentment. I think contentment ties in with peace. You can, even when you go through grief, you can still be at peace. And I think one of the things that this podcast hopefully will create with people, the listeners, is be your authentic self.
Absolutely.
The hardest con job you do is on yourself. Once you get honest with yourself and accept who you are and begin to love you for you are as your authentic self, there I think where comes joy and peace and happiness and contentment. It's when you hide from yourself is the greatest damage that does to yourself, because we're the only people that we're with 24/7 a day. You can't run from
Exactly.
yourself. So that was a
But
powerful comment.
I could say I see joy in your face right now because you're doing your purpose.
Thank
Or
you.
maybe you realize your purpose. There's joy there. I see joy in your face because I think you understand in your authentic self, you got some truth. And the truth wasn't just about you per se and your sexuality. It was about yourself as a person and what you had to offer, right? That must be very freeing.
It's totally freeing for me, too. And thank you for that compliment.
Right.
Well, Richard, it's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast today. I want to encourage all of you who have not read Richard's book, The Lonely Boy and The Enlightened Man, to be able to get a copy of those, and you'll find them very powerful. And I think you'll be able to find some parts of those books that you'll be able to apply to your own life as well. Richard, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure having you on my podcast today.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, the platform to share some wonderful thoughts together. Thank you, Dan. You're doing a great job.
Thank you very much.